Welcome everyone. I'm really happy to have you all here for the first webinar of the HoloRuminant Joint Dissemination Network webinar series. This webinar is organized as by me from the European Forum of Farm Animal Breeders. So what do? We ensure the representation of our member interest at the European level. We work on providing input for European policy and legislation. Part of that is also the supporting and promoting of responsible and balanced breeding. And we are always keen on engaging and promoting in the dialogue around sustainable animal breeding. And we are also a knowledge provider in European projects. And in that capacity, I am presenting to you here today. So in short, European Forum of Farm Animal Breeders could be considered the voice of animal breeders in Europe. Next to that, we also host the Farm Animal Breeding and Reproduction Technology Platform, FaberTP. For those who attended EAP last week, they might have seen our session. If not, it's recorded. You can watch it online very soon. The FaberTP technology platform helps develop and shape the research and innovation agendas and to help to set the priorities. We connect knowledge institutes and the private sector, and we promote research and innovation in the animal breeding sector. So that's from FOP's side. Some house rules for the webinar today. Any questions you may have can be asked in the Q&A box, or you can voice them out loud after the presentations. I have planned 15 minutes for every project presentation with 5 minutes for a Q&A straight after. If you have any technical issues throughout, you can report those in the chat box, or you can send an email to my colleague chalakaya@fop.info. Please mute yourself during the presentations, and I want to point out that this webinar will be recorded. If you don't want to be caught on camera, keep your camera off, or just wait for the recording and leave the meeting. So a little bit about the HoloRuminant Joint Dissemination Network. Why are we here? So the Joint Dissemination Network is a common network that aims to provide an environment in which we can optimize and share efforts, communication materials, and resources, as we think bundling forces is going to really help improve the impact of the different projects in the group. So who are those projects in the group? Of course, HoloRuminant, who is currently leading the Joint Dissemination Network. This one works on ruminants. Then we have 3D-omics, which is the sister project of HoloRuminant working in monogastrics. A similar story we have for the two other projects involved, Geronimo and RUMIGEN. They are sister projects from the same call, one working on ruminants and one on monogastrics. And then Re-Livestock, which works on resilient livestock farming systems, which has more of a holistic overview of the full sector. I'm not going to explain the projects in detail to you because you'll hear a lot about them during the course of the webinar series. But the 5 projects present a complementary effort to reduce environmental footprint of livestock production, while also focusing on genetic diversity and the health and welfare of farmed animals. With that, without further ado, I would like to move to the first presentation of the webinar series, which will be from the HoloRuminant project. It will be presented by Florence, and I will give the floor to you, Florence.
Thank you, Noralie. I will try to share my screen with all of you. This should work here. Can you tell me if it works?
Yes, it's working.
So Hello, everybody. I will tell you today about farmers, vets, and advisors' views regarding new practices to control microbiomes. It's a work that we have performed together with colleagues from Luque and Taigask. And myself, I'm from the French Livestock Institute with my colleague Elise. The context of this study is that we are gaining through HoloRuminant, but also other projects, a better understanding on the role of microbes in animal production. And scientists are developing new ways that utilize microbes to improve animal health and welfare and to mitigate environmental impact. And that's very interesting, but these innovations must be adopted on farms in order to gain the benefits that they can provide. So we need to understand better how farmers and other key actors both feel about microbiome and microbiome-related innovative methods, and how it can help us for increasing, for having good adoption of it. Talking about microbial ecosystems, we mean all these different kind of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live on the skin and mucous membranes of the ruminants. So skin, vaginal, digestive, respiratory, mouth, and esophagus. And the microbes differ between the animals, and they have quite an important role in the defense system and in maintaining health of animals. Telling you a bit about the experiments done in HoloRuminant, which could lead to recommendation of new practices, is quite broad, many different subjects. So here you can see, starting on left upwards corner, about birth delivery methods and contact between dam and calves. Also evaluating importance of cow-calf bonding on health and well-being of calves. Then about fecal microbiome associated with diarrhea in calves. About lamb's diarrhea and how much is linked with the contact with their mothers. There are also experiments on mastitis and other health experiments on heat stress in goats and how it affects microbiotes, the bovine respiratory disease and the microbiota there, and methane emissions. So it's quite a lot of different practices that could emerge from the project and could be recommended to farmers. This study has been performed as part of VP5 in HoloRuminant, and the aim is to collect stakeholders' perceptions, expectations, and practices to manage microbial ecosystem and explore their willingness to accept proposed innovation. So we have been working different steps. We made a review of research article about decision-making to explain the adoption of innovations and farming practices. We had also European stakeholder group and policymaker focus group held in Belgium. And what I will report for you now is a result from 4 national focus group discussions which were done in 4 countries, France, Finland, Poland, and Ireland. We gathered in total 43 persons. There were farmers, advisors, vets, and other people around, but very close to farming. We had standard protocols, and we had 4 steps: identification of microbiomes on farms. What do they already know about microbiome? What do they understand? And their opinion on the role of microbiomes in production, in health, and greenhouse gases emission. And then we gathered their opinions on innovations relating to different practices about early life, dietary transition, environmental issues, and we had them discussed together, these practices. The participants were recruited through a national contact networks, and they were, so we cannot see it's like representative farmers or advisors, because they came because they were interested in the project. So they have an interest in it. They are probably kind of front runners, farmers in the subject, and it's very interesting to know what they already understand and already think about the practices that are tested in the project. So that's what I will tell you about. That just to illustrate, that are some pictures about what happened in the focus group. On your link, the Irish focus group, and on your right, snapshot from the Finnish focus group. About the results, actually the people that were present had actually quite some knowledge about microbiome, and they could identify different practices that have an impact on microbiome when talking about a farm. And you can see here the subjects that were discussed in each country. There are a bit of difference, but there are also a lot of common aspects. So the facilities, building and housing are identified are as important for the microbiome. Nutrition and feeding also are well-known practices impacting, as well as hygiene and biosecurity measure that were mentioned in all 4 countries. In France, Poland, and Finland, the care of young animals or calf management were also discussed. And then there were some difference, some things that were discussed in one country and not the other. So the veterinary treatments of animals were discussed in France. In Poland, genetics, regional differences, and consumers' attitude. And in Finland, the health of adult animals. And then, but not least, the people present also discuss the importance of the human factor, the management, and the farmer's knowledge on both its system and animals, but also the fact that this management affects directly microbiome. So there, we had maybe an idea starting with that people were maybe not so knowledgeable about microbiome, but it was not the case. They could relate it to many different practical aspects on farm. And then we had the people discussing different subjects more in detail as some practices. Not all subjects were detailed in all countries, but you can see the list here. And I will not have time to tell you the results on all, but here I will tell you the results on these 3 practices: keeping young animals with adults, so cow-calf contact, feed additive to reduce greenhouse gases emission, and adding probiotics to the feed for health benefits. If you are interested in more, you can ask us, and we have written a deliverable also about it, and a paper is on the way. About cow-calf contact, there are quite a lot of differences between countries, especially because the practice is already applied in many farms in Finland. And what I will show you are what people discuss in terms of barriers, what makes it difficult to adopt the practice, what are the enabling factors, and what do they have of needs. If they should develop it, what would they need? And in parentheses, you can see in which country the point was discussed. So in terms of barriers, there were especially named many barriers in France, and Poland. And some of the important barriers relate to facilities, stables that are not adapted, and the investment needed. Also, on small farms, it might be less easy because the calves would have very different ages and be difficult to be put together with a nurse cow. There are difficulties related to disease problems, and France is seen as probably it's increasing working time, which it's actually not experienced from Finland. And there are economic aspects about the costs, the production cost might be higher and you will sell less milk. It seems difficult in Poland for farms without pasture access. And for the Irish stakeholders, it was not a subject that was seen as relevant. On the positive side of the balance, the factors that could help develop these factors, in Finland, the experience at calf health is improved. In France, several people have seen that there could see a societal demand with consumers asking them why they separate the calves. And in France, we also have sheep and goat dairy farming, and there they keep the young with the mothers, so maybe we could find inspiration in those systems. In Finland, the experience that cattle welfare is improved, that also it's reversible, so you can try the practice, but you can also return to the previous system. So the risk of changing is not so big. You can also test the practice on a small group of animals, and it can reduce the workload. So in terms of needs, the stakeholder we talked with would need to see some examples in practice on how it can work, about the facilities and also the management of the system. They would like to have the possibility to have economic incentives, either with subsidies or labeling. And the skills of farmers are essential. That's pinpointed by the Finnish stakeholders. And in general, several people lack knowledge about impact of the practice on calf stress and health, cow somatic cell count and mastitis, and about the different possible management methods. So quite different results from country to country, and also people did not necessarily agree within the same group, but we have here the points that were discussed in each group. If I take another practice that was discussed in the groups, the use of feed additives to reduce greenhouse gases emission, there were a lot of barriers mentioned. Globally, people were not so positive about this idea, and they mentioned a lot of different alternatives they would prefer instead of feed additives. Grazing, feeding better silage and less grains, biogas, circular economy, reduce the use of fossil energy, reduce replacement rates, slurry management, and hedgerows were different suggestions. And this is partly based on the fact that they have doubt about the unhealthiness of the product on animal and human health, and on the long-term balance of the rumen. In France, this added to also the aspect that the farmers didn't want to depend on industrial products which have a cost, and also which the farmer are not directly owner of and might depend of. And then in general, many farmers felt quite threatened by this topic and were very uncomfortable about this idea of greenhouse gases mitigation by feed additive. And enabling factors from Poland, from the Polish group, was that if the additive permit an increase of energy out of the feeding ration, maybe it could be interesting for the farmer. So there are many needs before this seemed to be adoptable by the stakeholders we talked with. They would like good knowledge based on a sufficient body of research and also testing in local conditions. We should have a documentation for known negative impact on milk yield, animal health, welfare, food safety, and economical results. Support from society, clear signal. Some people are worried about the consumers' acceptability, and knowledge on the effect on the environment and on human on long term. And in Poland, it was said that subsidies would be better than tax for fostering this change of practice. And last but not least, we also talked about probiotics given to calves for increasing, promoting a good health. It was not discussed in all groups. It's just in Finland and France. The barriers discussed are also in the same big categories. So it's about costs and about worries on the long-term impact. Both in Finland and France, people were stressing the fact that it would be better to prevent with good feed and good management than having to use probiotics as a way of correction of problems. In France, they have also tried to produce probiotics themselves, so making yogurt from your own milk or kefir, but it needs time. And the balance of it being that it's possible to produce it, and they have effects. Several farmers had tested them in the group. Also, one farmer was using fermented plant extracts. In Finland, probiotics are already known and used by some farmers, so it helps spreading the word, and they see it as a good way to prevent disease, and this is good because it decreases a workload. They also mentioned colostrum.
We started a bit late, so can you try to speed it up a bit so we still have a little bit of time left for questions?
Perfect. I'm coming to the conclusion. So at the end of the groups, we had a questionnaire to people and we asked them, okay, with what you know now, would you recommend a practice or not? And what you can see here is that the practices that are least recommended by the people we had are the ones keeping the calves with mothers and adding probiotics, as well as in the middle, the change of diets to reduce greenhouse gases emission, and more adoptable or easier to advise about hygiene, colostrum, and a gradual transition in diet. I think we think it is linked to the fact that this colostrum hygiene and transition feeding is practices that are already known and that fit with previous recommendation. So it's easy for them to communicate about it and they have some experience. For the other practices, there are quite a lot of barriers still, and we would emphasize the importance of having strong scientific evidence that the practice have a positive effect on production parameters, animal health, quality and safety of products, environmental and sustainability of ecosystem in a long-term perspective. And then it is important to demonstrate the applicability and efficacy in local farms, where practical aspects such as work organization and management can be shown, especially the farm's workload and work organization is of interest by the participants of our focus groups. And of course, and when all that is ready, capacity building and adequate training and integrating this training into other trainings and advice will also be important. Thank you. That's it for my presentation. We don't have much time for questions, but still I think we can take some. And I didn't see the chat. I don't know if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Florence. At the moment, we don't have any questions in the chat. Maybe we have room for a short question if anyone has one to speak up now. And otherwise, feel free to ask any questions in the chat so Florence can come back to them in the chat. Are there any questions for the moment for Florence? No, I don't think so.
The lamp diarrhea is INRAE in France.
And there's much more work from work package 5 where Florence is part of coming up, and also new results actually already ready, which weren't included in this presentation, but at the end of the webinar I will share a QR code to our international stakeholder platform. So I think if you want to stay in the loop on all the work that we do within HoloRuminant, but also work package 5, we would urge you to keep an eye on that group.
An appetizer about coming results. We did focus group with consumers about the same farming practices, and we are almost ready with results.
So definitely join the group. Thank you so much, Florence.
Okay.
Keep an eye out on the chat if anything happens in the meanwhile. And then I would like to propose to move to our next speaker, which will be Birgit from Wageningen University, and she will present on behalf of the Re-Livestock project.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see?
Currently, yeah, now it's correct. Perfect.
And do I need to change screen, or is it okay?
No, it's perfect like this.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Birgit Gredler. I'm a researcher at Wageningen Livestock Research, and I'm involved in the Re-Livestock project. And today I'm going to present you a little bit what we do in the whole project, and more specifically in the breeding work package. We all are aware about global warming. So global warming and climate change are related to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. And you can see in the graph here where you can see the increase over the last 50 years of average temperature around the world. So part of this increase is, of course, natural, but a lot has been is due to human activities. The reason for those increase in temperatures are increased greenhouse gas emissions, where next to CO2, methane is a very important one. Methane has a short life in the atmosphere between 10 and 20 years. It can also be seen as an energy sink in the animal, and therefore can be seen as a cost for the farmer. So I brought an example from the Netherlands. So methane emissions from agriculture in the Netherlands, it's about 77% comes from cattle. And out of those 77%, close to 80% are due to enteric methane emissions, and the rest comes from manure. And like in many other countries, the Dutch government has formulated some climate goals, which is a reduction of 55% by 2030, and they want to be carbon neutral by 2050. I brought this figure here from Dominic Visser, who presented this last week or at EAP in Lyon. And this shows several pathways to lower emissions from the livestock sector. And you can see here, of course, there are pathways like dietary changes or increased productivity. You can work with feed and nutrition improvements, rumen manipulation, reducing food loss, and so on. And it was nice to see that he also highlighted breeding as having really good potential to lower emissions from the livestock sector. So our mission is that we would like to support farmers in reducing the environmental footprint of their farms by offering them multiple mitigation tools. And animal breeding is definitely one of the important mitigation tools that they can use. It's cumulative and permanent. And I think it's important to say that here, of course, the livestock sector has to take responsibility, but it's not the main source of methane emissions. Nevertheless, I think it's good to act proactive and not reactive and show that we are taking responsibility. But this also means that we need to provide the farmers with tools that they can show that they actually act on this. A previous colleague of mine, Yvette de Haas, has conducted simulation studies to see what we can actually achieve with animal breeding as a mitigation strategy. And this graph here shows you 3 different lines. We look at the trait methane intensity here, which is gram per kilogram of milk. And you see the genetic trend. So we have the year 2020 here and the year 2050 here. So with the current breeding objective, if we do not include methane or select towards lower methane emissions, we follow this line here. If we do a combined selection for methane and other traits, we see a clearly reduction of methane emission by 2050. And the last line here, that's showing the theoretical maximum. This would be if we exclusively focus on methane emission alone in the breeding goal. We can, of course, reach an even more reduction. But this is just to show you that breeding is really a mitigation strategy that is promising to follow. So coming to Re-Livestock, Re-Livestock is a Horizon Europe project. It started a year ago, and it runs for an additional 4 years until 2027. We do have a budget of about 13 million euros, and we do have partners from Switzerland and the UK included as well. The overall objective of the project is to evaluate and mobilize the adoption of innovative practices applied cross-scale. So Re-Livestock tries to follow a holistic approach, bringing together, looking at the animal, herd level, farm level, sector and regional level to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from livestock farming systems and increase their capacity to deal with potential climate change impacts. And when you read this official overall objective of the project, you can clearly see that this is, this holistic approach can only be achieved if we really work closely together across disciplines. So we need teamwork, and we need to have all sectors being part of the game, so to say. Re-Livestock has a really large consortium, so there are 37 partners from 13 countries are in the project included. You see it in the map here, so they're spread all over Europe, and we have associated partners from Australia as well in the project. And here I would like to show you a bit the focus of the project. So Re-Livestock focuses on the re-concept. So it proposes a holistic approach based on this re-concept by reframing climate change action in livestock systems. And so, for example, we have work packages dealing with adoption, of course, with the feeding strategies, management strategies, assessment of the whole farm systems, looking at circular systems, and remap of a roadmap for transition, so how this all can get together. And we also do have a work package on breeding for livestock for resilience. And I will now focus a bit more on the work that we are doing there. So the main objectives for the breeding part is to demonstrate the potential of animal breeding in climate change mitigation, but also adaptation, to improve the accuracy and the predictive ability of breeding values for mitigation and adaptation traits, and finally then to come up with breeding strategies, selection indices that take into account traits that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to adaptation to climate change. We try to do this by following a cross-country approach. So it's not that Re-Livestock does not finance any phenotyping in several countries. It's more that countries come together and bring the phenotypes that are collected in their home countries, so to say. And so we are looking at phenotypes that are directly recorded on the cow, so on the host genomic data. And in addition, we are also looking at rumen microbiome data. So to give you an overview of the data of the methane phenotypes, so originally in the project proposal, there were 4 countries, so that's Australia, Poland, Spain, and the Netherlands, providing phenotypes for the analysis in this breeding work package. And we are currently discussing with other partners to join the initiatives, and we are also discussing a lot with there are other big initiatives. For example, there's a large consortium in Canada doing similar things with similar objectives. So we see how we can collaborate there as well. So a bit more details about the data. So in Australia, there is data available from 400 Brahman and composite cattle and Angus. So they estimate to have a bit more than 4,000 cattle phenotyped with green feeders by 2026. They also provide microbiome information on parts of those animals. From Poland, we have a sample of close to 500 Holstein cows phenotyped for methane emissions using a similar approach to the green feed. From Spain, there are at the moment a bit more than 3,000 Holstein cows phenotyped for methane using the sniffer technique, and they do have already a very good sample of the microbiome of 439 cows available. And the Netherlands, we have at the moment a bit more than 8,000 Holstein cows phenotyped for methane emission using the sniffers developed in the Netherlands. And we are aiming to phenotype on 100 herds in the Netherlands, reaching about 15,000 cows, hopefully in the near future. And currently, there is also the sequencing going on for the microbiome information of around 1,000 Holstein cows. So within the project, we will end up in the next 2 years or so with about between 15 and 20,000 cattle phenotyped for methane, and about 2,000 cattle with rumen microbiome information will be available for the analysis. So what are we going to do? As you've seen, so phenotypes are collected in different countries. The methods are not the same.
Reminder for time. Can you keep an eye on the time?
Yes. So the objectives will be that we define the traits across countries, so bring the data together, take into account that it's different measurement techniques. So look at different trait definitions for methane, look at how we can standardize the data. So for example, a sniffer phenotype in Spain may not be the same as in the Netherlands. And then finally look at the genetic evaluation models, also including biological information. A bit more about the microbiome information. I have brought here the how animal breeding works. So we have a phenotype which is determined by the genotype and environment. And now we would like to include also the microbiome information. So there are previous studies available already showing that the microbiome composition is heritable. So heritabilities are between 0.10 and 0.40. And some microbes show some microbes' relative abundance is genetically correlated with methane emission. So my colleague Oscar has shown this very nicely already. So the aim is to improve the predictions of breeding values for methane, including microbiome information, and also to compare the composition, first of all, of the microbiome across different countries. As an example here, Oscar from Spain has already worked together with Australia. They did a comparison study using data from rumen microbiome from both countries, sequenced with the nanopore sequencing technique. And it was really nice to see. So they showed similar results in both populations. And the heritability of the aggregated phenotype of the microbiome was between 24 and 32. And really very nicely, the genetic correlation with methane ranged between 0.50 and 0.77. So this is really promising result. So it's really will be nice to see what it will bring if we include the microbiome in the genetic evaluation. And then finally, an important topic in Re-Livestock will be, of course, breeding strategies, how to define selection indices. I have brought a graph from FAB here showing what the ideal breeding objective should look like. So the aim is to lower the environmental impact of livestock production systems without any adverse effects to other traits, increase the adaptation of livestock to climate change, and then come up with selection indices for different future climate scenarios in different European regions. Very shortly, I have talked so far about mitigation, but adaptation is also an important topic in Re-Livestock. And here we specifically look at the phenotype for heat tolerance in different pig and cattle breeds. And just very quickly, I show an example of a colleague in Re-Livestock, Manuel Ramon from Spain, where he looked specifically using MIR data as a selection criteria for thermotolerance in sheep. And here these graphs show you very nicely that MIR data can be a really good predictor of heat stress. It shows really nicely that animals clusters, for example, here, this is where animals that were under heat stress, where those blue circles, those were the animals that were in a comfort zone. And finally, what do we do with the results? So as I mentioned in the beginning, Re-Livestock follows a holistic approach, bringing all disciplines together. So we try to get the results from the different work packages, feeding, breeding, management, and so on, together in models, LCA tools, model for food system, global vegetation model, and so on, to really provide tools to enhance the greenhouse gas mitigation. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Birgit. I'm sorry that we are a bit pressed for time today. Are there any questions for Birgit at the moment? Otherwise, feel free to also post them in the chat or screenshot her contact information right now so you can send her an email afterwards. So I'll suggest that we just keep an eye out for the chat in the meanwhile if there are any other questions. Thanks again, Birgit. And we will just move to our final speaker to see if we can manage to stay in our time slot a little bit. So the final presentation will be from Jeremie Vandenplas, also from Wageningen University, and he is representing the RUMIGEN project. So I'm opening the floor to you, Jeremie.
Yes. Do you see my presentation?
It's working.
Nice. So yeah, I will try to stay on time. So I will present the project RUMIGEN and especially the first results that we got in the work package 3. I'm presenting on behalf of Sophie Matalia, and that's a project shared among multiple partners, but the results here are obtained from France, Spain, also from the Netherlands. So the main objective of RUMIGEN is to provide and to develop breeding tools, especially in dairy cows, to improve the efficiency and the resilience in a context of climate change, but also to maintain the genetic diversity. And so we have a large panel of competence, first on quantitative genetics, where we want to analyze heat tolerance traits and define them also, and also to manage the genetic diversity. There are also some work package. They are linked to the epigenetics, and the main idea is to develop methods to to predict the phenotypes based on the genome and the epigenetics. And finally, there also one work package on related to genome editing as a new breeding technique. And on top of that, we have a special work package related to social science, and the main aim of this work package is to evaluate the societal acceptability of these new breeding tools that we will develop within RUMIGEN. So RUMIGEN involves 18 partners spread across 9 countries. You can see here on the map. And I will today mainly speak about the work package 3, which is about heat stress. And so the main objective of this study was to measure the impact of heat stress on the performance of dairy cows at the population level. And for that, we used the existing national data provided by the National Breeding Association. Such data sets are usually include phenotype, but also the pedigree of the animals. And we link this phenotype and pedigree of the animals with the daily records for the weather that we got also from the national agencies. So this involves, as I said, 3 countries, Spain, France, and the Netherlands. And we all did the same analysis in the 3 countries separately. First, for production traits like milk yield, fat yield, and protein yield. Also udder health, and also a reproduction trait in terms of conception rate. And then in the second step, we combine all these results at an international level, and we did a meta-analysis. So for the material, as I said, we got the data set from the Breeding Association. We got that for multiple breeds. So we got them for Holstein in France, Spain, and Netherlands. Then France also got data from Montbéliard, and in the Netherlands, we also got data from the MRY as a small breed. The data consisted mainly in the test day records for the production traits and the udder health, and also in a conception rate at the first artificial insemination for the fertility traits. And the period that the data covered varied a bit across the different countries because of the size of the data sets to be analyzed. So France focused on the last 4 years between 2016 and 2020, while the Netherlands and Spain focus on 10 years, going from 2010 until 2020 or 2021. And yeah, in terms of number of cows, it varied between 10,000 cows for the MRY, because it's quite a small population, up to 7 million Holstein cows for France. We also, to be able to do a meta-analysis at a later stage, we also agreed on which kind of data to be used to represent the weather information. And after some analysis and discussion, we agreed that we will use average daily temperature and average daily relative humidity. And we would summarize these 2 parameters into one single index that we call temperature humidity index, and that was proposed already in 1971. the same purpose. So now we have all the data, and we started to analyze them. And first, we wanted to estimate the effect of the THI at the population level. And we did that for all the production traits, somatic cell score, but also the conception rate. And what we did, we just fitted an additional fixed effect as a class effect, which was the THI effect, into the model, and the remaining part of the model was usually based on what is already used by the breeding association. And so after several analyses, we decided across the 3 countries that the THI class for the production and somatic cell score traits would be the THI average within the 3 days before the test day record. And for the conception rate, we use the THI average within the 8 days after the artificial insemination. So the day of the artificial insemination and the 7 days after that. Maria Carbano showed these results of these analyses last week at EAP. I will skip that due to time. So let's go to the results. So first, we present here the estimated THI effect on the milk yield for the cows in the first lactation in the 3 countries and in the 3 breeds. So in green we have the estimated THI effect on the milk yield in France for Holstein and Montbéliard. In orange we have the shape for the Netherlands, and in black we have the shape for Spain. The main conclusion that we can observe here is that the threshold. So if we increase the THI above a certain threshold, we will see a decrease of milk yield, and this threshold seems to be more related to the countries and to the breed. Because for France, the threshold seems to be around 50 and 55 for both Montbéliard and Holstein, while in the Netherlands, the threshold seems to be about 60, 65, and in Spain, it's even higher, it's about 70, 77 THI value. So if you relate that to degrees Celsius, it's about 10 degrees in France, while it's about 90 degrees in the Netherlands, and it's about 35 degrees in Spain. So that's quite a large variation, and it seems to depend on the country. So we can maybe explain that by acclimatation, for example, in Spain, where the cows are more often related to high temperature than in the other countries. But it could be also related to different farming system. For example, where the cows in France are maybe more outside than in the other countries. We have the same graph here for fat and protein yields. And we again see also that the threshold is a bit more related to the countries than the breeds. And that after this threshold, we will see a decrease of fat yield and protein yield. For somatic cell score, we see also that there is some threshold, especially in France, where we can observe quite a large increase in comparison to other countries. And so we can observe that after some threshold, increasing the THI will result in increasing the somatic cell score. And finally, for the last rate, which is conception rate and the first artificial insemination, we can observe that the threshold is more similar across countries, about 60 of value for the THI. But then they are different shape. So Montbéliard and the Holstein in France and Holstein in Netherlands, behave more similarly than for the Holstein in Spain or the Montbéliard in Spain. And yeah. So to discuss a bit, we can observe a negative impact of increasing THI on our performance. And for example, for production in France, we can see that increasing the THI from 50 to 70 will result in a loss of 6 to 11% of the daily production. And similarly for the fertility traits or the conception rate, we can observe that for French and Dutch Holstein cows, increasing the THI from 50 to 70 will result in a loss of 10%. Also, what was not expected is that, yeah, as I said already, that for production and somatic cell score, we see some difference of threshold across the different countries, and this difference is more related to the countries to the breed. And so we could relate it that maybe to a farming condition, but also to maybe to some acclimatation, for example, like in Spain. And finally, for the conception rate, the thresholds are more homogeneous, as I said, across the different countries and also different breeds. But we can see a steeper decline for the French and the Dutch Holstein than the Tudor breeds. So again, maybe there are some acclimatation, but also maybe some, like Montbéliard, might have more genetic abilities for fertility than the other breeds. So these are remaining questions. To conclude, we can observe the negative impact of increasing THI of all traits across all breeds and all countries. And there are some specificities, they are more related to the countries and to the breeds. And that's also really important to consider that, because the low threshold doesn't mean that there is a problem of animal welfare or that the animals are in stress. It just probably means that these low thresholds are also confounded with other effects that we cannot measure. And so maybe it would be important also that we have some other measurement in the barn or where the other animals are, instead of having the measurement of the weather from a weather station quite far from the barn sometimes. But anyway, the traits on the heat tolerance can be defined, and we can combine the performance and the weather data in the 3 different countries. And yeah, we can also conclude that heat tolerance is quite a complex trait that needs further research. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremie. Are there any questions for Jeremie right now? I'd like to say we can post them in the chat, but we're already over time. So if there are no urgent questions right now, I would suggest to get in touch with Jeremie directly. Yeah. Then I would just like to make some final announcements. And share my screen for a second again. There we go. So today we had 3 presentations, one from the HoloRuminant, one from Re-Livestock, and one from RUMIGEN. Thank you so much to all the speakers once more. But with finishing this first webinar, I would like to point your attention again to that this is a series. We'll have a second webinar on the 19th of September, and the third webinar will be on the 3rd of October. The second webinar will have presentations from the 3D Omics project, which is the sister project from HoloRuminant working on monogastrics. And the third webinar will be focusing on the Geronimo and RUMIGEN project again. So if you haven't registered yet, we would love to see you there in the second and third webinar. You can use the same registration link if that's what was used for the first webinar. And with that, I would like to thank you for your participation. Right here, you see the link for the international stakeholder platform of HoloRuminant. We aim to keep you up to date about everything of the Joint Dissemination Network and the HoloRuminant project itself. And with that, again, thank you for participating today, and I hope to see you all on the 19th. Thank you so much.